Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 Elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. Here we're facing the French defense, and by the way, if you saw the previous episodes of the previous episode of the speedrun, my opponent was cheating and he has been banned, and I have my Elo. Well, I got my Elo awarded back, which is why the rating is higher. It was a very interesting game, but just, there's so many cheaters at this rating level, it's a little bit ridiculous. So here we're facing a French defense. It's not a massive deal. It was still a very interesting game. And I'm going to play b3, which is what I like to play against the French. I have been toying with a couple other systems, and if you have any suggestions for systems I should try against the French, then please let me know down in the comments. But this is the Paparticulat Gambit. I assume that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. And we are sacrificing the e4 pawn, but it's incredibly difficult for black to hold on to that pawn. And if he does accept the sacrifice and we go knight c3 attacking the pawn, the only good way to hold on to it is f5, and that leads to some very uncomfortable positions for the black pieces, often, well, in my experience. My opponent goes knight to e7, which is interesting. Taking makes no sense to me, because I assume black can just take with the e-pawn, and then he opens up his otherwise bad French bishop. So we could defend the pawn with the knight. If he pushes, I think that's probably quite good, because we can play a move like knight to e2. And I don't know, it's kind of difficult to hold on to this pawn. And after a move like c5, I think we can like rotate the knight to g3 and then play c3 to undermine the d4 pawn. And we've had similar things in the past on this channel against that kind of setup. So I'm going to go knight c3, and if my opponent takes, we'll take back. And the idea being that still this bishop can't get out. Yeah, and he does push very quickly. We can also consider knight to b5 going after the pawn, which is actually interesting because d6 is potentially weak, as in we can maybe get a knight in there after a move like e5 because the bishop is blocked off. So let's say knight b5, pawn c5. How would I continue there? Because our knight, it could always retreat to a3 actually if he gets kicked out, and then even come into c4 in some lines. So that's quite interesting. The only issue with knight to e2 is that we have to move the knight before we play c3, because our bishop doesn't see the d3 square. So it gives my opponent the option to push pawn to d3 after we play c3. But we could consider this, although he could try and trade off the pawn as quickly as he can. But then I suppose we just move, and then after something like take, we're probably doing very, very well. Both moves look very viable. Both moves look viable. I think I'm going to go knight b5, though. To me, this feels like the more active approach, because I'm trying to like kind of make more things happen, have some potential additional threats in some lines. And also, as I said, if we ever get hit with a move like a6 or c6, we can always just drop the knight back to a3. It's really not a big deal, because c4 will likely be a nice square to come to, particularly if pawn c5 is played. Although, maybe b5 can keep the knight out. But okay, he goes e5, which is surprising, to be honest. I was expecting c5, but I suppose he's trying to open up his bishop, which makes sense. Here, if knight to f3, bishop g4, we can consider bishop to c4, with some potential threats of knight takes e5, bishop takes d1, and bishop takes f7 checkmate, because the knight covers d7 and f7. So that could be interesting, and I think I want to go for it. I'm also trying to say that, like, look, my opponent's played 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn moves in his first 5 moves, right? He's only actually moved one of his pieces in his first 5 moves. So I'm trying to claim that, I am developing my pieces quicker than he is. So, okay, knight to g6, defending e5. We could consider, well, let me just say quickly, whenever you see a knight on g6, b6, b3, or g3, your first gut reaction should be to push the flank pawn, because you should always be thinking, well, if I just push h4, h5, where does this knight go, right? Because if it goes back, I just win a pawn. Now, of course, it should be relatively clear that the f4 square looks quite nice, but we can just play g3, and the knight has nowhere to go. It can't come forward in any capacity because our bishop is dominating the knight's movement, so it would just have to go back anyway. So that's not really a concern. Regardless, it's going to be booted off of the defense of e5. Now, if h4 and my opponent goes h5, I would assume that's probably good for us. Although, I suppose it supports bishop to g4, which we probably don't want to encourage. So maybe now we should play c3 and immediately challenge the black center, since we do have 3 pieces fighting for the center, whereas black kind of has 1, but it's not participating in defending d4, only the queen is. So if c3 and take, we could even consider pawn takes and trading the queens, because c7 will be so weak, and e5 will be weak if pawn c4. That looks very nice. I think c3 is the way to go. If c3, a6, attacking my knight, I suppose that's a more difficult question, because we will have to go back to a3, but then our bishop can get distracted. But then again, like I said, after take, I think we're doing well there. And knight to f4 is always met with g3. That's not a problem, but in many cases, the e-pawn will be hanging, so knight to f4 won't be an option. So I think c3 is probably the way to go, trying to open up the center and punish for black for his lack of development. This is also very interesting because this is just I don't know this position. This is not some pre-prepared opening theory. Now, I am familiar with some kinds of positions similar-ish to this, so I have some idea of some of the things I should be looking for, mainly the c3 pawn break, which, like I said, is very common, and it's a good way to try to undermine this strong pawn wedge in the center. So he does kick my knight. Let's go knight to a3. And yeah, I think if takes, obviously we can't take with the bishop because our knight hangs, but even if the knight wasn't hanging, I think it makes a lot of sense to take with the pawn and go for a queen trade. Okay, that's an interesting move. Bishop e7. So you might be thinking, well, isn't the d4 pawn hanging? Well, I think my opponent's point is if take, knight takes, then he goes bishop a3, and queen d4, and he just wins a piece because my bishop would be overloaded. So the way I immediately think about this is, okay, well, what if I just move my knight, but I also can move it with tempo against the e5 pawn. So now I am threatening d4 because my bishop isn't overloaded, and I'm threatening e5. How does black deal with that? So let's say knight c4, dc3 looks natural to me. Getting rid of one of the weaknesses with tempo. We can consider d takes or bishop takes. Both make a lot of sense. But let's say bishop takes, going after the e5 pawn. The only viable way of defending that seems to be pawn to f6. Because if bishop f6, then just knight takes, bishop takes, and I'm just up a pawn. So I'm not convinced by that move from black, to be honest. And I suppose we get what we were talking about before, where I was saying that if knight b5 and we get kicked out with a6 and the knight goes to a3, it feels very natural to bring the knight to c4 to reroute it back into the game, which is exactly what's happened here. And one of the big things in this position is, do I get to liberate my dark squared bishop on this diagonal at some point? And if I do, can black counter it with a move like bishop f6, or is he just going to have a weakness on the g7 square, right? It's difficult for black to answer. Also, h4, h5 is potentially on the way, particularly if black castles. Okay, knight c6, defending d4 and e5. All right. So if we take and take, I mean, we could play a move like d3, bishop e2 castles. It's viable. We could also consider pawn h4, pawn h5. I'm not overly convinced by that, to be honest. We could leave the tension. We don't have to take. We could just play a move like bishop e2. But then knight to f4 does kind of come with tempo. But I suppose we can castle. And if he wants to take my bishop, that's really not the end of the world. This bishop isn't that great anyway. So if we go bishop e2 and my opponent goes b5, that's the move that we really need to be thinking about. Because where do I put my knight? So maybe I should be playing pawn to a4 instead, stopping b5. Because if a4, b5, take, then I just win your rook. And obviously, going down the exchange and the pawn is not good for black at all. So a4 also just looks like a good move, grabbing space on the queen side. And if my knight does need to retreat back to a3, it means it would be defended by the rook and the bishop. So my bishop could go after this diagonal and not be overloaded with having to defend the knight. So I think a4 makes a lot of sense, and I'm going to play it. And I don't think black has any threats in this position. He certainly has good central control, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't have any threats. So, okay. Now if bishop e2, knight to f4, castles kingside, I think that position looks interesting. Bishop g4 is maybe quite annoying though, so it could make sense to start with pawn to h3. I suppose the bishop would probably come to e6. But then, I mean, if you take, then I'll just take, and that's not a problem. If h4, black could win a pawn, but I don't know, that feels pretty bad. Especially after a move like queen h5, hitting the bishop, and mating threats on h7 alongside the rook. So probably not that. But if h4, I think, I don't know, just h5 and bishop g4 is on the way, and I don't really have a good way of going about that. I don't have knight to g5, because I just don't have enough support, I don't think. Maybe I do, because if h4, h5, knight g5, bishop g5, hg5, queen g5, I could play rook h5, supported by the queen. His queen moves to, I don't know, f6. I don't have a follow-up, sure, but it is a nice position. However, he doesn't have to take on g5. And then why is my knight there? Obviously, I can take here, but I don't really want to weaken the b4 square unnecessarily. I see no need. And I also would like to keep the tension. So maybe just pawn h3, stopping bishop g4. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. If knight to f4, I can just play pawn to g3 and kick the knight away. Or obviously, e5 could be hanging in some lines. Whoa. Since when did chess.com do ads like that? I have premium on my main account, but not this account. So I'm not really used to that. Okay, yeah, bishop e6. Well, I'm not fussed if he takes. That's not an issue whatsoever. If bishop e2, knight f4, castles kingside, knight e2, queen e2, bishop c4, queen c4, that position looks very nice. I quite like that. So let's just go bishop e2 and castles. Am I inviting d3? I didn't even consider d3. Ooh, okay. No, I don't like that. I didn't even consider this move. Ooh, that's a strong move. d3. My bishop's got to go back to f1. Ooh. Maybe I should have played d3. Okay, this has gotten uncomfortable. If he finds this. If he finds this. Which I really hope he doesn't. But I mean, I can't even castle. I can't castle because my bishop would get trapped. But he doesn't. He goes pawn b5. Okay. Alright, so by developing his bishop to e6, if take and take, the queen now defends a8, so the queen can take. But I think that's probably good for me, because then there's no pawn d3. However, my knight would be under attack, and I can't bring the knight to a3 because bishop takes, queen takes. So that's no good. So what else can I do? I could take, and I don't have to take his rook. I could play knight to a3, going after the b5 pawn, alternatively. Now he could play pawn d3, shutting my bishop off, and like bishop f1. I think that's okay, because b5 is kind of weak, and also d3 is kind of weak. I don't really see what other option I have. I think that makes the most sense. So let's take. I don't think it makes sense to play knight a3 immediately, because then black probably gets to trade off his weak b pawn. So let's go knight a3. If pawn b4 is played, which is definitely playable, I'm not sure what I think of that move. Let's say we take. Maybe there's ideas of knight takes d3 and knight c2. Well, maybe he takes on a3 with the rook first and then goes knight c2. That's potentially quite annoying. So after c3, maybe we play something else, like knight back to c4, which also shuts off this bishop's vision of the b3 pawn. I think that makes sense. So if c3, knight c4, d3, bishop f1, take, then my queen opens up against the d3 pawn. And yes, he can take on c4 and double my c pawns. But d3, I don't really know how he would defend. Maybe knight to f4? Okay, he does go pawn b4. Okay, so I think I should play knight back to c4. I don't really see another option. I suppose knight b5 is a move. But after pawn d3, the knight is very loose. It's just undefended. Maybe we can play pawn c4, but he's probably going to take. I don't know. I mean, I could. Oh, no, I can't consider this because d3. Knight b1 makes no sense. That's just super passive. I also need to play a little bit faster. So I'm going to go knight c4 because I think it keeps pressure on e5, which feels like a good thing to do. Also, why is my camera out of focus? Hello? Hello? Okay, there we go. All right. Ooh, I don't know about that move. Because can't I play queen takes? Am I missing something? Because now if d3, I have bishop d1 rather than bishop f1, which allows me to castle. Okay, now I'm confused. Why would he take with the d pawn? If take knight b4, I probably just take it. Actually, no, I don't. I just castle. Because then knight c2 doesn't come with check. So if knight c2, then, I don't know, just queen c1. Okay, interesting. Can I just castle? Just, you know, defend the queen? I'm sure I could take, but I don't really want to allow rook to a2, because, you know, there's just a lot of things on the second rank. So I'd rather keep fighting for the a file. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, the channel's been doing incredibly well recently, and I'm really grateful for it. Really, really grateful. Knight f4. Okay, going after the bishop. Makes sense. And if the bishop moves, then you can double the pawns. But then I can put the bishop on b3, probably. Maybe you want to go knight to d3. Hitting the bishop, which makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. e5 is weak, though. But this does always come with a check. I could play rook e1, just defending the bishop. And if you take my queen, I can always take with the bishop rather than the rook. And if rook e1, if you allow bishop f1, that's just got to be good for me. So let's say rook e1, knight e2, rook e2, e5 is hanging. If you take on c4, you double my pawns. Maybe you can play pawn b3. That looks quite nice, actually. So if rook e1, knight e2, rook e2, bishop c4, bc4, b3. I don't have time to take on b4. So what about... See, if queen d1, I'm allowing queen a2 and also rook d8, which are both uncomfortable. Okay, so let's say bishop d1 and you do go knight d3. I'll say that does happen. I don't think that's the end of the world. Let's say bishop c2. Queen a1, bishop a1. The knight's got to get out of there. I mean, you can take, but I'm covering the b3 square with the bishop. So I think this makes sense. I also don't think I have loads of choice, so I can't be too picky. Okay. Take. Rook a8? Maybe. If rook a8, not bishop c2, because then this, and if this, then knight e2 check picks up the bishop. So if rook to a8, probably bishop to b2. And if knight to d3, that's kind of annoying. That is quite annoying. Yeah, rook a8 looks strong. Okay. Didn't expect that. I suppose he relieves some pressure on e5. He's giving me the option of bishop b3, though. But then again, I can take and put pressure on e5 with the bishop. So surely rook a8 has to be played to stop this. Because then he threatens to take my bishop. Also, bishop a4, going after the knight, which puts pressure on e5 by proxy. My opponent's playing a very good game of chess. Very good game of chess, especially with how little time he's spending. Very impressive. And in a weird opening. Very weird opening. I really didn't have a clue what was going on. But it'd be interesting to check it with the engine afterwards, for sure. I think black really has to keep the pressure on here. Really has to keep the pressure on. Otherwise, if we break out, it could be bad. Okay, yeah, so rook a8, bishop to b2, knight to d3. And if bishop to b3, then this. Oh my god. Dude, can you not? This is really uncomfortable. Don't like this at all. How do I do this? So if bishop to b2, knight to d3. I mean, my bishop can't be defended. It's just got no squares. So I can't play bishop b2. But if I play bishop c2, you take. I can't take back because of knight e2 check. So what do I play? Is the bishop better on c2 or b3? I'm going to say c2 to stop knight d3. And also, on b3, it might be vulnerable to knight to a5 ideas. Maybe I'm allowing this. I don't know. This is really difficult. Okay. Takes, yeah, so I can't take backs of 92 check. Which we know. So what about rook e1? Just stopping knight e2. I'm also very low on time. Also, g3 is interesting. If here, I think that's good because we'll pick up this and e5 is weak. But g3, knight e2, king g2, yeah, something like that. No, that seems very bad. Let's play rook e1. This is damage control now. The position has gotten a little bit out of hand and out of my control, so I'm trying to bring it back in some capacity. If knight e2 check, I probably play king f1, because if knight e2 rook takes and rook takes a1, deflecting my rook, I don't know, that doesn't look great, because c3 is a big problem then. Once this bishop gets kicked away, yeah. Knight b4, okay. Okay, well, e5 is potentially weak. I only have one square. Maybe knight d3, though, hitting the rook. This is really bad. Really bad. If knight d3, rook d1, c2, I can just take it. c2 immediately. Huh. Yeah, knight d3 is on the way. That's the problem. So, knight takes bishop f6. I don't really have an option, do I? I don't really have an option. With no time on the clock, like, super difficult to try to do anything. This c pawn is just going to be the end of me, I think. I can try and move like bishop b2, but then, I mean, knight d3 just comes with forks. Wait, what? Oh, wait, there's knight e2 check. I completely missed that. Completely missed that. And that's just game over. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can try and fight on a little bit. Oh, that's just a free bishop. That is a free bishop. Whatever. That's just game over. I really want to check that with the engine because that's nuts. My position just completely crumbled, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I should have done about it, to be honest. Like, it felt like everything was very promising. And I had a very interesting position. And then I just did not think b5 was a particularly strong plan. I thought knight to f4 made a lot more sense, or pawn to d3 made a lot more sense. But yeah, I mean, I can resign here. There's nothing left to be done. Let's jump into the analysis. Oh, my opponent has like barely played any games. He just gained like 50 elo from that. Let's see what the computer has to say. That'd be very interesting. Okay, so 80.6% accuracy for us, 89.9 for my opponent. That was a very impressive game from my opponent. The opening, I've never really seen this kind of approach to the position. Computer hates knight c3. See, often I will play a move like e5 in this position, but it didn't feel right with the knight on e7 because I was like, well, the knight's just going to come to g6 or f5. Normally, if knight f6, then I will play e5 because the knight has to go back to d7. And if he comes to e4, then you can just kick it around a little bit, right? It's quite easy to take advantage of it. So anyway, yeah, we had d4, knight b5, computer prefers knight to e2. e5 is the best move. I thought c5 was far more natural looking, but I guess not. knight b5, e5, knight f3, knight g6. Makes sense. c3, a6 makes sense. Bishop e7. Bishop e7 is a very interesting move, and it's actually the best move according to the engine. Admittedly, not a move I was really considering. I thought, like, I don't know, knight c6 or c5 looked more natural. But bishop e7 is really interesting, because if I take and e takes, the point is that I can't take with bishop a3, and queen d4, because my bishop gets overloaded. So a really nice idea to spot with such little time, like basically no time used. Knight c4 the engine hates, because of knight c6 only move, which of course makes sense. I kind of, for some reason, blanked on knight c6. I just assumed he would take, and I was like, well, I've got a pretty nice position here. Like something like this. I thought f6 was probably forced, and then we just have a great position, because our lead in development is going to show itself once the center opens up, and this diagonal could be a problem. But knight c6, a4, castles make sense. h3, bishop e6, which I thought was very natural. It was like the best developing square for the bishop for sure. I thought maybe knight f5 could be played, but like not yet. The e-pawn is still a problem. The whole time I was expecting a move like bishop to f6, just to secure the e5 pawn and prepare knight to f4, but apparently that's not a good idea. So h3, bishop e6, bishop e2. And here, yeah, I just thought that d3 was the obvious move, which my opponent didn't play. This was what I was expecting. And then, I don't know, maybe you can take, maybe f5, it looks pretty good. But pawn b5 is the second best move. Second best move is b5. So I take, and go knight a3. The engine wants me to take here, which just sacrifices a knight to gain a little bit of space. But I mean, this is just, you're kind of admitting that you're going to lose the game if you do this. Like, you get a bit of compensation, but you're just going a piece down without a fight. So I tried to fight. Knight a3. Again, I just thought pawn d3 was the most natural move here. I didn't see why my opponent wasn't playing it, but he went pawn b4, knight c4, rook a1, queen a1, dc3, which I again found kind of baffling. Queen a8, I also didn't understand. Castles is a mistake, though. See, I didn't take, because I thought, well, if something like take castles, it's just like rook a2, which seems problematic, which was a fair assessment. But I don't think the engine wants to castle. The engine wants king d2, which I just didn't consider at all. Just helping this bishop out, I suppose, with the defense of c3. But castles, knight f4, which is the only move that maintains a sizable advantage. And I just didn't realize how powerful it was. Because if I get one more move, let's say f6, if I get the ability to move my rook, so let's say rook d1, then knight f4 is met with bishop f1. My bishop controls the movement of this knight, and we just have a very nice time. But knight f4 straight away, and it doesn't quite work, because if I go rook e1, which is the best move, why did I reject this? Why did I reject this? I think, like, I don't know, knight e2, rook e2, queen a1, bishop a1, bishop c4, bc4. Oh yeah, b3, that was the problem, is that b3 gets played at the end of all the lines. And I couldn't figure out how to deal with this pawn. Let's say rook b2, engine wants rook a8, or even just knight a5, defending and attacking. And I just thought these positions were not holdable. And the engine agrees with me. But bishop d1, queen a1, bishop a1, bishop c4. Bishop c4 felt so strange. I was expecting rook a8. And then, I don't know, I mean, the engine still wants to take on c4, but I just thought this bishop was quite good. Engine disagrees. It loves bishop c4, bc4, rook a8, which is the only move. Again, like I said, we just need one move. We need one move to break out of this position. So here, like g3, let's say knight e6, bishop a4, let's say knight a5, cb4, bishop b4, rook b1, and we can get back into the game. But rook a8 is the problem. I went bishop c2, which is the best move, but after bc3, rook e1, I mean, I can't take because of knight e2 check. So rook e1, knight b4 is the best move, which I just didn't even consider. I don't know. I mean, what was I expecting? I think I was expecting a move like knight d3. Wait, no, sorry, not knight d3. What am I on about? I don't know. Maybe something like knight d4 just looked natural to me. Or even just a move like f6, maybe. But the engine hates them. Oh, yeah, no, because now I can take. Maybe like bishop b4, just defending the pawn. Either way, I was surprised with knight b4, but it's a strong move because you're coming into d3. Here c2 is played, which is the best move by far, which I, again, didn't really consider. I thought knight d3 would be played because it just looks very nice. Like attacking this, I have to move my rook somewhere. c2's on the way. And there is this, but I mean, this is completely lost, obviously. But c2 straight away is the best move. I took on e5 because, truthfully, there's nothing left to do. All I can do is play a bishop b2, but then I just mean knight d3 and it's game over. Game over. So I took a chance. And my opponent found the best move very, very quickly. I completely blanked on this move, and I have to take, and then knight e2 check, which is, of course, just game over. Bishop c3, knight b3. I forgot that my bishop was hanging, but then again, both of them were hanging. And then, yeah, I just resign here because there's obviously nothing I can do. But, yeah, I don't know. Really weird. Really weird game. I mean, very interesting, but very strange. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, and if you want to see the b3 French in more of the fashion that it tends to be played, like, you know, with the sacrifice being accepted and knight c3, knight f6, that kind of thing, check out the video up here if you are interested. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, the playlist to all of them is linked down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.